I've been obsessed my entire life with success and how to get to the next level. And because of that, I've created some extraordinary opportunities for myself that have granted me with phenomenal godly powers. Okay, maybe not so genie in the lamp type, but I know how to get people to cash in on some of their wishes and turn them into reality. So where do you go to get podcast upgrade opportunities and a bunch of phenomenal cosmic powers for your life and your business? Well, you found the podcast in the rough, so let's dig in. All right, so I'm doing this podcast inside my car. I always say that the car is like the perfect sound booth. So this podcast is going to be about how to podcast on the go, right? And like the best ideas come to you at these times. Now, definitely don't, as a disclaimer, try to podcast and operate a motor vehicle. I wouldn't recommend. Okay, so I'm using the Shure SM58. Again, this microphone is amazing. I really think it's cool. It sounds great. But here's what I want to say. I'm using the PodTrack P4 by Zoom. And this is a mini portable mixer, battery operated, which I have a power bank plugged into it so that I can keep the power good. And I'm sitting here in my car and I want to use this as an example. Like say you're going to pick up your kid and you're waiting in line for school, or say you're waiting at the grocery store for some reason in a parking lot. Someone's running in to get something. Or you're in between transit for your job, right? Or somewhere, or you're traveling, right? Pull over, park the car, turn it off so you don't have any rumble, and podcast. Back in the day, this method is how I manifested and built my companies, right? I remember having a 30-minute drive time to a job that I hated, right? Multiple jobs, right? Every job I drove to, I hated just because I didn't like those jobs and I had to figure it out. And so I remember driving to these jobs and thinking, what am I going to do with my life, right? And after a while, this will kick in and you'll start to go, I got to figure something out. Like I cannot stay in this job, right? So to make that career shift or to build a company, to become an entrepreneur and build your businesses, sometimes you have to hit that point where like enough is enough, right? But there's a nice easy transition into this too. Maybe you're unhappy with your career job, right? Maybe you're unhappy with the job that you currently have and you're driving to this back and forth. Use that 10, 15, 30 minute, maybe more, drive time to and from work, that crappy job, to start to process and feed your mind information that'll help you get to that next level. Maybe you need to start off with some personal development audio programs or something. Listen to an audiobook on the way to work and back, right? Just to work on you, right? Or use that time. And these are all scenarios that I have done. These are all things that I've applied to my life in those times to build my companies. So driving to this job, sometimes I would say, okay, I'm going to work on me and I'm going to do manifestation, mindfulness, gratitude, maybe deep breathing. And I would do these things there to and from work. And then, well, what can I do to create something in my vehicle while I'm driving to work, right? And so I started bringing a voice recorder around with me. And this is back in the day. This is like 2006, right? And I started recording myself with ideas and notes and all this type of stuff, which eventually turned into a full book that I published, right? And then it turned into an audio coaching program, right? I used the vehicle literally to create a new vehicle to get me to another location, to get me to a new destination, a new place, to create a new road. And so this is the perfect formula for any one of you. Maybe you're the stay-at-home mom or dad, or you want to create a side income or create a new hobby that could turn into some business, or maybe you're a business owner and you're trying to figure out what can I do to leverage and get more play in the market, to get more people to be aware of my brand and my company and my services. Well, this is it. Pick yourself up a microphone and something to record on, or a little recorder if you're just starting out. But if you want to go all in and you're starting to do a podcast, this is a great way to do it. Maybe you're like, I don't have enough time to do a podcast. Well, you do. You could make a little bit of time. I mean, you could lay in bed doing this before you go to bed at night, right? You could do this, sitting at the computer, multitasking, like just say a few words, and then you have some heavy editing to do. Maybe you say a few key ideas that are cool and you compile those into some really cool podcast episode of brilliant ideas, right? But if you want to just, shoot from the hip, right, and be straightforward and just rip a podcast, like right now, just if you're somewhere sitting in your car and you have a few moments, get off the phone, the social media, and start applying yourself and capturing something you want to share with the world. Maybe it's about your business, your brand, or you want to talk about a topic or something to help other people,
or raise awareness for something, but this is where you figure that out in your vehicle, on your way to and from work, sitting somewhere, once you figure that out, and then getting in your car. And that's the other thing I would say this is, again, this setup is ideal, right? Because you're not gonna break the bank, okay, on this setup. Shure microphone, SM58, not bad. I think you can get it for under $100, if not $100, right? You got the Zoom PodTrack P4. It's a handheld recorder, mixer. It's powerful, right? Like 148, 149, something. Maybe get it cheaper, maybe a little more with a bunch of bells and whistles. And there you go. You're set up. You're going to need, you're just going to need an SD chip, right? Or if you want a power bank to make this thing battery go longer. But there's no reason why you can't podcast right now. Again, it goes back to my roots, right? And this framework that I've, been able to recreate over and over again for not just myself, but for my friends and others. And that is, wherever you're at right now, if you want to get to this next level, whatever that is, your vision, your dream, your goal, maybe it's building a company, maybe it's just taking on new adventures, whatever that is, you have to create the new vehicle that's going to get you there, right? Just because your podcast, you might be like, well, how do I make money with this? Let's just say you're not good at business. You're not good at any of the frameworks I deliver to you, but all you do is you podcast, you sound great, and you could build a following there organically, naturally, without any effort besides just, I'm going to rip a podcast, I'm going to record it, put it up on my outlets and share it and see what happens. As long as you could do that, that might create a vehicle, and that vehicle then opens new doors and opportunities for you to take advantage of, and you'll see those when they happen. And you go, oh man, like I use this podcast to launch my modeling career. I use this podcast to launch my business. I use this podcast to launch my next level adventure. I use this podcast to grow a YouTube channel. I use this podcast to grow a course, to do a book club, to have fun, to educate people. Like the list goes on. Again, it might not be the podcast. Like that's not the end game. Like for me, it's just an extra outlet, and I love podcasting. That's why I do this. It's a passion. I love to podcast and educate people. But for me, at the very, very beginning, if you go back to my earlier episodes, the podcast was very granola, if you will. It was like mixed. There was a lot of stuff going on. But that was my personality. It reflected who I was. And at the time, I didn't have that end goal. I just said, this is going to be a new vehicle. Let's see where it goes. I remember attending podcasts, being a guest on shows, and I was always like, man, I'd love to do that, right? That looks expensive, but I was already invested in video equipment and camera gear. And I said, well, I could use some of these mics. And so I started my podcast using my cell phone. And then quickly, the audio wasn't bad, which we talk about that's inside this group. It wasn't a bad setup, just using the phone. But then I was like, well, I have microphones that connect to my phone. Let's do that. And that sounded great. And I love that. And I did that for like the first 2 seasons, right? The first full season and then the second season was part of that, because then I advanced and said, I want a better microphone, and I moved up. But what was so nice about this vehicle that I created at the very beginning, if you go back and listen, you'll see all my growth. Like you'll see all the experience. And I took you along the journey. I shared with my viewers, with all of you, every step of the process. It was like, oh, here's my podcast. This is what we're going to talk about. I'm taking a walk today. This is my daily motivation. This is some things I wanted to share with you on like how to, just become a better person or get your mind right or improve your health or to think positive about your business. And then as my business started to grow, I started thinking to myself, okay, how can I grow my business and share that story on the podcast? And it kept going. And then as I got bigger clients, there was more NDAs and things I couldn't talk about. So I had to be very careful with what I said on the podcast, but it also trained me to be a little more professional on my podcast. And as I evolved on the podcast, that's how we got to here with season 3 as a reboot. I started season 3. I shifted at the very beginning and I said, I'm going to do the Think Like a Strategist podcast. And because I was doing strategy for so many big companies, and I was like, well, I can talk about the strategies that I've created to make these entrepreneurs all of this business development growth and brand awareness and how they've exploded in the market, right? I said, I'm going to put that together and I'm going to share that inside the podcast. So I was just getting started, and then it didn't feel right to me. It didn't feel organic to me. It didn't feel right for my viewers because I shifted into like more of a niche, right? But I also realized that that's not what I want to do. I don't I don't want to teach everybody about the strategies to grow your business in that field. I'd much rather teach you about the things that you can utilize right now that doesn't cost you any money. Because what if you can't implement the strategies that I talk about because it costs a lot of money? Or what if you don't have the backing to push the strategies that I've created? Or what if the strategies I've created isn't something that you're ready for right now? But we can all be ready for a podcast. And so I took some time off. And I said, I want to come back and rebrand. And that's how we got to the Podcast in the Rough reboot of season 3. Because this, to me, is exciting. It's fun to talk about podcasting. Everyone can apply it to their business, their social life, their next level opportunities. They can create new doors. They can open new doors with this, create new opportunities. The list goes on. And I have a passion for talking about podcasts. So there's something you have to think about when you're doing this. And I bring this up because right now the quality in this car is amazing because we're inside of a car. It's like a sound booth. It's all, it's nice. And I got cars driving by. Plus this microphone's awesome combined with the mixer. It's all affordable. And I'm able to do this on my downtime, right? On your downtime, you could do this, right? But here's what's nice about it. I created this show, this podcast, and extended into a training course into this group to educate people because I love podcasts. I could talk about this all day, every day, and I have so many strategies. And then going back to my original podcast of me just growing and sharing that story, that's what I encourage you all to do. You might not be perfect at the beginning. People want to know the journey. They much would rather watch you grow than to show up and say, oh, this person's got it all figured out already. That's cool, right? Because even I don't have it all figured out right now. That's why you're following this, because you're still watching me and listening to me evolve and grow, right? Just because I've had so much success in my career and my life and I've shifted gears on different things doesn't mean that there's no more growth. It just means that I'm going to still share the story and the vulnerability of where I'm at right now, right? And it's fun to start a podcast from the start when you don't have it right. Because think about your followers, your listeners, they're going to hear you at maybe at the phone stage where you're just speaking to your cell phone using that as your microphone. And then when you get a new mic, you could talk about it. I got this new mic. I love your support. Your support helped me grow. Maybe you had a buy me a coffee type of thing set up on a link where people can donate to your next project or your next microphones, and they support your podcast, right? So you're starting to grow. You're starting to learn to make money on the podcast. You're starting to learn how to get people to contribute by giving value back, right? So you grow, and they love the new mic. And maybe someone's like, you would sound really good on this microphone. There's countless people that I hear them talking on mics and I go, yeah, but your voice would fit so good on this other mic that I've tested out. It's amazing. And I recommend it. And then maybe other people want to push that and they help support that so you could afford that, right? Or maybe you just run out and buy it and you just geek out over it. You want to have a topic in your podcast that you can produce anytime you want, no matter how you're feeling. You can get excited about it. You never want to dread something. You don't want to be like, I created this new vehicle, this new outlet, and man, I'm just not looking forward to going ripping this podcast or doing this episode or spending the time building this. Don't complicate it, right? Maybe you want to write this stuff down and then read it as a script on your podcast. Maybe you like that. Or maybe you're more like me, where you're like, I have all this knowledge. I just pick a topic. I know how to riff it, and it feels normal. It feels organic, and I just hit my key points. And if I do mess up, I'll go back and edit it out, right? Nothing wrong with that. Eventually, it gets so good that you just know your stuff and you speak it and it's on point and you don't have any editing really to do besides small trimming in the beginning and the end. Or if you want to implement ads in the middle of your podcast, which we'll get into later in this group, because that's how you can really maximize your business growth or spread awareness or grow the podcast yourself, right? Without having to pay to play, right? It's a lot of these secrets. And let's dive into that just for a second before I wrap up, because I don't want to make this too long. But I started off podcasting thinking, man, it'd be cool to have a podcast. That'd be cool to find a way to make money on podcasting. But for me, it was always like, I'll use the podcast as another outlet to promote my business. And it's an amazing outlet. It works. But then I was like, how do you make money on podcasting? And I couldn't do it for myself at the beginning. Maybe a little bit if you monetize it. I had a little success there, right? And then I sold brands against my podcast, but then I quickly stopped doing that because it didn't fit in all the time with what I was talking about. And I wanted to be true to my listeners and not just sell out, if you will. So I kind of just directed them into my films because they fit better there. But doesn't mean you can't sell sponsors into your podcast. It can get a little complicated, but at the local level, it's very easy to do. As long as you're adding value to all parties and everybody loves what the outcome is, right? Don't just do it to make money. Do it because you really want to add value. Okay. Hear that out for sure. Okay. It's very important. Now, as I advanced in my career as a videographer and then as a strategist, and I started working with bigger clients, everything started to compile up and lean into two things: video advertisement, commercial video, live streaming, stuff like that, and hand in hand with audio, which led into podcasting. And I started applying strategies and frameworks and building ideas because these top entrepreneurs had millions of dollars to throw at the ideas that I had. And they brought me in to do just that. And I didn't want to waste any money. I was very smart at that. So where they're thinking they're gonna throw millions of dollars at this idea and they're gonna probably take a big loss or lose a bunch, but they have a bunch more money to keep throwing at it till it works. Well, it worked for me right off the rip, and it worked for them, and they saved a bunch of money. So it was a no-brainer. They just kept doing it and saving a lot of money and then pushing that money elsewhere to really maximize that framework. So for me, I started to learn how to build people's podcast and make other people very, very wealthy with their podcast. Now, I say that because it's exciting and it's successful, and it was like a top tier for me to make people millions of dollars on their podcast. But let's dial it back. You don't have to make millions on their podcast. Don't expect to make millions on your podcast. You could, it can happen. It can totally happen. Maybe it's 100,000, maybe it's 50,000, maybe it's 1,000, or maybe it's a couple hundred extra bucks that you make over the course of a month or two that pays for a vacation, right? Let's get realistic, right? But that doesn't mean it's not going to blow up for you. How hard are you willing to grind and push and do this? Plus, you might nail it right off the rip, or it might take you a while. It's a slow grow process. But that's why I've created several areas of development in your podcasting. That's why this is podcasting from start to success, and different frameworks that you can apply depending on where you're at in your life, in your podcast, in your business, and what you want to do. As you find yourself, you discover your voice, your message. And as you start to apply these, you can start to make money, big or small. But the goal should not be, I'm going to do a podcast and make a bunch of money. Yes, that would be amazing to show up and just rip a podcast, to do a podcast, and that's your community and that's all you do. That'd be amazing. And that could be a goal for you. But use this as a vehicle to open so many more doors so you can get into excitement, adventure, meet people, do things that you were unable to do without this outlet. If anything, maybe it just gives you the courage and confidence to move forward. So that's my message to you. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Let's get in the comments below and talk about this very thing of podcasting. And if you have any questions, I'm here to help you. And also, I want to take pictures and show you below in this post the setup I have of what I'm currently podcasting in my car. So you see how this is all laid out. Really simple. So, all right. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let's get to work. Start your podcast. Podcasting from start to success.